I did not start this war. I offered you peace. You should look at the new Star Ace War for the Planet of the Apes Caesar 12-inch soft vinyl figure. In Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, the first talking ape Caesar led the apes in a rebellion against the humans. In War of the Planet of the Apes, he became the general of an ape army battling the humans who refused to let them live in peace. The Star Ace figure of Caesar sits on his horse ready to go into battle with his spear. The horse features removable saddle and bridle as seen in Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. The statue is polyresin and soft vinyl, is approximately 39 centimeters tall to the top of Caesar's head while mounted on the horse. First things first, I'd like to thank the folks over at Star Ace that kindly provided the sample of Caesar with horse that we could have a look at in this review. Noted there are two versions of Caesar available. The one that they had sent my way is the one him wielding the spear, but there's also another version of Caesar with him with this rifle. To come included with either one of them, you get yourself an instruction sheet. It's not so much an instruction sheet as basically a product catalog to show you the difference between the two. It is only printed on the one side, but of the one side that's printed, you can see there's the rifle version. And there's the spear version. Not only is what he's wielding differently, although he's not really necessarily wielding the rifle in this case, it's strapped around the back of his torso, but you'll also see as well with the spear version, the one that we're going to be looking at in this review, that he's actually painted differently with his war paint added to his body and his face. Maybe what we'll do first is have a look at Caesar's trusty steed before we move on to Caesar himself. Now, whereas Caesar is made of soft vinyl, the horse, on the other hand, is actually made of polyresin, so you will want to be careful when taking the horse out of the foam tray insert inside the box, because there's potential of breaking both in the legs and the ears of the horse. Now, the horse itself looks rather familiar, and I have to wonder if it's the same type of mold that they used also for their James Dean 6-scale figure, something of which we've also looked at here on this channel if you wanted to check it out. While it may not be identical, certainly when it comes to the color scheme as well, it is looking like a very similar horse to the one that they released along with the James Dean figure. There are some notable differences in the color, and I feel as well the mane of the horse is slightly shorter on this version as well. Now this horse does have a removable saddle and bridle. To remove the saddle, carefully pick the horse up, and it does have a fair bit of weight to it. Lift the horse up so you can see its undercarriage. And basically all you're going to want to do is unharness the horse, feed the straps through. They almost have more of a leather-like material that they've used for the straps themselves. And the actual saddle portion of the horse feels like it's made of a faux suede material. It's really nice, actually, the material that they've used for it. Now, you can keep the saddle on if you want to have the horse looking like the War from the Planet of the Apes. You can take the saddle off if you want to have the horse bareback like it looked in Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. I prefer to really have the saddle and the bridle kept on myself, just because it adds a little more character to the horse itself. Looking at the head sculpt here, very carefully holding it in hand. The sculpting on this is fantastic, and something I mentioned when looking at a similar horse, the James Dean horse, I also thought, and I feel the same way here, I don't think this needs to have articulation to it. Especially on spindly legs like this, if you start putting in articulation points and making this out of, say, plastic instead of polyresin, I feel like you're going to be suffering some difficulty having the legs standing straight. Instead of this being a posable horse, of course, it's just going to be a staction statue that, of course, Caesar's going to be standing on top of. Looking at the details of the horse itself, for it being really a staction statue, there really is a lot of personality, especially when you're seeing the eyes, for example. While it may come across as being an all-black steed, there is actually some rather interesting colors that they've played in here as well. You see more of it not so much in the head as we spin this around so you can see it from all the sides. There's the front, and again from the side here as well. You can take off the bridle, but for how elaborate it is, seems to be strapped onto the horse's face. I really don't want to start dismantling things, and again, I feel like it adds a lot more character and personality to the horse's head sculpt. But going back to a point that I mentioned, while the horse may seem like it's all black from head to several toes and hooves, actually when you look at it closely, and I'm almost hoping that the camera's able to pick this up, there are some slighter lighter variations actually in the horse's hair. Some of the areas come across a little bit more black, but then when you look at areas like its lower legs, for example, there's very much notably lighter colors that they brought in there. I kind of like that it does have a slight variation that's not completely all painted the same color. Now, as I said, though, that the mane here is a slightly more shorter hair that they've used. And as you can see, they would have used a faux hair material, and they've attached it to basically the center section of the horse's neck. It does add, again, a lot more realism than as opposed to just simply sculpting. I'm glad that really they didn't sculpt the mane. This is really a point where you really would want to utilize some real hair or real equivalent of it, some real fur that they could actually put in there. There's a few little tufts of hair along the top of the horse's head as well. And, of course, you've got a real tail there on the back also. Again, this is something where I feel like even though they're using poly resin as the main material for the majority of the horse's body, I am really happy, though, that they didn't decide to use like a sculpted in mane and they didn't sculpt the tail. I think it would have lost a little bit of the realism. And as it goes right now, it is a really nice looking horse, something very suitable for Caesar to be sitting on top of. Cue then Caesar, who normally would be on top of his horse, but for this purpose of the review, it would be a lot easier to show you guys the very intricate sculpting of this guy's face as well as the rest of his body by holding it in hand. So we're going to stick with holding him for the time being until eventually I put him on top of his steed. Now, the horse is made of poly resin. Caesar, on the other hand, is made of soft vinyl, and it actually works better that he's made of softer vinyl. First of all, it makes for a lighter display piece, because you wouldn't really want to be putting something like a poly resin Caesar on top of a poly resin horse, just in case Caesar fell off of it. It also benefits this guy, too, when it comes to him holding the spear in hand. If you look at the spear, it's slightly thicker in some of the areas of the handle, and if you want to kind of have it right in the middle of the spear, I find it doesn't have enough clearance, though, in the grip of his hand. Because he has softer vinyl everywhere, including, of course, his hands, you can bring the fingers out just a little bit more and give you that much-needed space that you need to get the handle of the spear all the way through. I'll put the spear in his hand in a second, but first I want to show you guys the work, the care, and the paint that they put also into this piece. Now, sculpt-wise, I'm going to hold him back so you can kind of see. He's in a straddling position. This is going to be the exact same sculpt as the rifle version, but the two differences, obviously, with the rifle version to this one is that this one has the spear, the other one has the rifle, which would actually be strapped across his torso and basically just sit on the back of his torso as he's sitting on top of the horse. This one has the spear that's going to sit into his hand, and then, of course, the main difference, the paint difference between the two. This one, the spear version, has the notable war paint. More subtly applied here in the torso area, it comes across more like just stripes of white. It's subtle, but certainly you see it from a distance. It actually kind of looks like a rib cage. He does also have a few little scratches and cuts there on the top of his body as well. It looks pretty fresh, too, the way that they've made the red shinier like this. And, of course, the main draw of the war paint is when it comes to his face. I love the way that they've painted this. It's not just straight white either. In fact, I'm actually seeing more pink and purple than I am of white. And the way they've also painted it too, and I'm hoping that you're able to see it here on the camera, there's more just a transition of white where he's smeared it across his face, and it's darker in some of the areas here, but then it has just a transition of the white that's blended into the fur. I'm hoping that you guys can actually see that. See, it's got little streaks of white that look like they've been streaked into his hair. It's along the side of his face, it's along the bottom of his chin, it's along the top area here as well. And you can also see the little red line running in between the eyes. The paint on this guy is fantastic, especially when you look at his eyes. Not only have they darkened the eyes, so it's a different color than the face paint, but also the way that they've added it almost seems like a clear coat over top of the eyes. It really makes like the eyes look like they're alive. It's almost unsettling seeing it so close like this. But again, like some fantastic sculpting and paint on Starius's part. I like the coloring of the ears, too. It's a real dark color of both browns and kind of a beige color that they put in there as well. And they've actually made it a little bit more shinier, like they've added a clear coat to that, too. I honestly can't think of anything I would really have done differently to the head sculpt here of Caesar. And as we continue the trend of looking at the rest of the sculpting of the figure's body, we'll spin this around so you can see it from all the sides. There's not a whole lot of extra coloring that gets brought to his fur. It's kind of really kept and relegated to a very dark, almost chestnut brown, even borderlining a black. Under certain lit conditions, especially when I've got it under the studio lights, it actually reads in some of the areas like it's really a dark gray. Some of the areas, like his arm, for example, seem to be a slightly different shade of color than the rest of his body up here. It's kind of more of a more consistent kind of a dark brownish black up the top. It actually comes across like he's got a little bit more white here. Maybe a little bit of that war paint. See a little bit of these little streaks of white that's been added to his forearms. Just adds a lot more personality to it. You see a lot more of it here on this side, how he's got some additional strands of white that's added in there as well. Okay, so we'll talk about his spear. Actually, one last thing we'll do is we'll talk also about his legs. Now, his legs, obviously, because he's straddling, are going to be relaxed. They're not going to be flat. The intended plan, obviously, is not that Caesar's going to be able to stand on his own. The whole purpose of this is that he's going to be sitting on top of his horse. So for obvious reasons, his feet are going to be relaxed like this. You can see like the individual toes. Nice little wrinkles, and even the toenails sculpted in there nicely as well. But again, the whole idea that the legs are going to be draping off the side of the horse. So let's talk a little bit about his spear here. I'm going to put the Caesar down for 1 second. It's a very long spear. In fact, when you put it next to the horse, it's taller than the horse's head, right there. Again, it seems to be made of that same soft vinyl material. It has some really nice sculpt to the blade itself, the end point of the spear. And even like the sections of the wood, they've brushed it to add a nice necessary grain to it. So it does look like a real wood material. A little shinier here, the wrappings that are in the middle area of the spear. And then we get to the very end of it. It kind of looks like bamboo. And to fit that into his hand, what we're going to do is just pick the figure up once again. And what I was talking about earlier about being able to pry his fingers, actually that comes rather in handy, because if you want to have the spear more in the middle area as opposed to, say, like the end, or having it this way. You could feed it through this way, yes, but it's only going to get to a point where it stops, like about the mid-handle area, kind of when that wrapping starts happening on the sculpting, kind of is the place where it seems to stop. I find actually it's a lot easier if you just put the handle right by his hand and then just pry the fingers away from the palm, and you can quite easily fit the handle of the spear right into his hand like that. And the whole idea is he's going to be draping it down like this. It's going to be resting to the side of his steed while he's riding the horse. And of course, you're going to then take Caesar. We're going to bring the horse forward a little bit. And you're just going to fit Caesar on top of it. There's really no designated area where Caesar fits on top of the horse. Actually, if you get it right around the center area, or a little bit further, maybe forward to the saddle, you can then also take the straps, I guess the bridle, and you're going to feed that actually in between his fingers. So it actually looks like he's holding the bridle of the horse. There we go. Displaying it certainly from the front. You get the full effect of what Caesar looks like on his horse. Providing, yes, you have the necessary space, because this isn't just Caesar you're talking about Caesar, the spear, and the horse. So it's going to take up a little bit more space on your collection shelf. But if you're a big fan, certainly, of War of the Planet of the Apes, or really any of the new Planet of the Apes films, which I loved, you're really going to love this piece on display. Not only are you getting the benefit of the sculpting, the paint that they put into Caesar in the first place, you're getting also the benefit of the spear, but you're also getting him riding on top of a horse. And you don't get that too often when it comes to collectible pieces. Certainly, you don't get a lot of that when it comes to the War of the Planet of the Apes or the Planet of the Apes films. We actually have gotten Caesar on top of his horse. I really think that Star Ace has done a fantastic job with this release. So in this review, we looked at the Star Ace War for the Planet of the Apes, Caesar and horse with a spear. Star Ace did produce 2 versions of the War for the Planet of the Apes Caesar. One, the one that we looked at in this review with him carrying around the spear, but the other one, as you can probably see on the side of the box here, is him with the harnessed rifle across his torso. Now, the horse, from what I've seen online, as well as the way they've sculpted Caesar, seem to be identical. So really, the only difference between the two is that this one's holding the spear, and he has, of course, the notable war paint across his torso, and more predominantly featured on his face. I like the look of him, certainly, with the war paint. It brings a lot more character to it, and especially considering that the horse already is a very dark colored steed, and then you've got the more darker, browner Caesar sitting on top of it. I'm glad to kind of see like that war paint does bring some necessary brightness to the look of the statue. Speaking of additional white that they could add to the statue, as we have already looked at this one, again, there's that rifle version. I would really like to see Star Ace produce a 3rd version of the War for the Planet of the Apes Caesar. And again, I'm going to draw everyone's attention to the side box artwork. See the fallen snow that settled on the surface of Caesar's fur, not to mention the horse as well? Imagine if Star Ace produced a snow fallen Caesar, where you just have the new fallen snow sitting on his fur. I think would really make for a nice piece. And again, bring some additional brighter colors to an otherwise dark colored statue. Now, when it comes to this statue, the horse, of course, is done in poly resin. I realized several times in this review I said horse, of course. But the horse is made of poly resin, and then you've got the softer, more lighter Caesar sitting on top of it. It's the best way they could have gone. If they had gone also making a poly resin Caesar, first of all, you'd run the risk of Caesar falling off the horse and maybe breaking something on him, but it would also add more weight to the spindly legs of the horse. Again, the best thing they could have done, poly resin horse, softer vinyl Caesar sitting on top of it. But just again, throwing it out there to Star Ace, if they're considering to use this mold again, snow fallen Caesar. You don't have to even call it snow fallen Caesar, but having Caesar with the white snow all over his body, I think would make for a great looking piece on display. A big thank you though to the folks over at Star Ace, who provided the sample once again of the War for the Planet of the Apes Caesar with, again, spear and horse. What do you guys think of this piece? Let me know down below in the comments section. And if you guys are new to this channel, enjoying all the content you're seeing, hit that subscribe button down below. Turn on that bell notification. And make sure, yes, you're coming back to this channel because we will be looking at more Star Ace pieces in the not so distant future. And as always, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.